If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
With the conversations that have been going on concerning the Pirates season and the mishaps and the trades that might be happening, I went back and listened to the Bucks in the Basement episode from this time in 2019. A younger Craig's voice coming out of there, aged a lot since then. The beard has gotten grayer, but for the most part, the conversation, unfortunately, in my mind, and I may be a little bit jaded because it's my voice, has sounded very similar as to what's going on with the Pirates. We're going to talk about all that and what's going on with the current Pittsburgh Pirates. But first of all, Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm hanging in there. I'm glad that it's not Bucks in Scott's basement because with all the rain that we've had over the last few days, it would be a damp episode. But it was an encouraging trip to Chicago for the Pirates, even though they didn't win as many as we'd hoped they would. They were able to hang tight with one of the best offenses in baseball. And even though the scores may not necessarily reflect it, they are playing the Detroit Tigers pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, there was, the earlier game today just kind of got away from them a little bit. And we've seen that happen from time to time. The pitching staff that has been, pretty much locked down, not only the starters, but also the rotation. Things got away from them earlier on in the game. This game tonight, not just because of the rain delay, lasted a little bit longer than most of would have hoped for. Isaac Matson had been locked down and gave up a home run, or this one's probably done before the rain delay. But like you mentioned, I mean, they played the Cubs like a division series. And I hate to equate this to, football because I mean this is baseball, it's completely different. But it definitely felt like an NFC North battle. It felt like, no matter what the team's records were when they kind of came in there, they played really well. I don't know if it was the wind holding some of the hits back. I feel like that series could have gone either way. It was good to see, but honestly, I mean, the record is what it is at this point in time. I mean, those close games, I like seeing that, but I'm trying to figure out what is going to get this team over the hump? What is going to get them to the next level? Obviously, the last 2 years, 76 wins. We've talked about this before, Scott. They've happened in different ways. 2023, it was a surge towards the end. 2024, it was a fall towards the end. And it kind of came down towards the same record. We see a team in the Tigers that we're playing right now that, has gone through a rebuild, retools, whatever it has been over the past 8 years and is finally getting to the precipice of being one of the top teams in Major League Baseball. But when I look at this team, it's not like there's a ton of superstars on there. There's a guy in Javi Baez who, played terribly for the Tigers and was, that contract that people would not want to see their, players sign for, that's that albatross of a contract. And now it's finally coming around. You have Spencer Torkelson, who was a top prospect, who looked like and was called a bust for years, finally coming and playing well with some players that are being added. And I feel like that, I mean, people will point towards the money that was added to the Detroit Tigers, you know, overall payroll during this past season. I've seen articles out there written towards it. But for the most part, it has been these players that they've kind of held on to and put faith in that have come around and put this team in there. And in my eyes, it's still threading that needle that we talk about.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. One, as we talk about, development is not always linear, and there seems to be a lot of discussion in pirate social media about, oh, this is year six. This is in the talk about year six, year six, year six. There's no true roadmap for these rebuilds, retools. Sometimes it does take the teams a little bit longer. Do you find your players that you really believe in and you commit to them, and you keep racking up high draft picks that come to the major leagues and can help you? That's kind of what Detroit has done. They have a history of that. Some of the contracts that they've signed guys to, and Miguel Cabrera being one of them, and he's his own level of player, but that contract that he had, and they had no choice but to let him play it out because he wanted to keep coming back. But they have a history of paying guys, hanging on to guys. But that's to say that the this focus on year six of the rebuild, doesn't mean that that's the end of the road. You see the Orioles take a little half step back and now playing better. It's possible that if you tweak things, then maybe things can and maybe hopefully will get better.
Yeah, and that's where like I mean before, we hopped on here obviously earlier today, we are discussing what we're going to be talking about tonight, and I kind of put it out there like I'm like you here's the topics you're thinking of, and maybe I was in a deep dark place, I'm not really sure, but I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, like how far away is this team from contention? And I in some ways fell into that old thing that was said by Cam Bonifay back in, God, 1996, 1997, like that 5 year rebuild. And so, like, okay, we're in this certain year. This is where we should be. This is where we should be moving forward. And obviously, I would like to be further along at this point in time. But like I said, I saw those articles out there and people were like, well, okay, well, this GM has only been in there for 3 years. So maybe he was able to turn it around quicker. Well, most of the players that he's using to turn it around quicker are the players that came from the former GM. It's not like he did a ton within this past years. I mean, Gleyber Torres, he's in there, so that's like something different. Jack Flaherty from last year, brought back again this year. You have, some relievers, different stuff like that. But for the most part, it still has to be that core of your team, because those additions can only do so much. If Spencer Torkelson continues down the path he was on, if Javi Baez continues down the path he was on, like that's where like the Tigers were kind of stuck in that purgatory. And I feel like the Pirates at this point in time are kind of doing the same. I mean, we've had many conversations about, Jack Swinski being a 18 home run hitter, 25 home run hitter, and then cratering. So, like, if he stays as the 18 to 25 home run hitter, what does that mean for this team? We've had conversations earlier on this year as to Brian Reynolds and, historically bad season for him that he's had, outside of 2020. If he has his normal rebound, what does that kind of look like? Ono Cruz, after a little bit of a back tweak, kind of comes back. And for the past, I think I looked at it and we were talking about it, at least 120 some plate appearances, has come to be a player who's batting 188 and has zero slugs. So, I mean, what happens if that back doesn't tweak? And I hate to say like all this different stuff, but yeah, I mean, it is it is a team game,
Yeah.
and it all has to come together completely because I mean, as much as we talk about, the I guess inequalities within baseball, yeah, even those teams that have spent a crap ton of money. We've seen the Cubs. I mean, the Cubs that spent a ton of money, they don't win every year. You had the Mets who came out with Steve Cohen and spent more than anybody's ever spent out of their pocket in their first year. Did not do anything.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it comes down to being a team game, and that's where like my thing was at is like, how many pieces are we away? Like, is there like places where we could insert players? Obviously, I think at this point in time, left field is a given,
Hmm.
but I mean, how many bats is it going to take? And how many, question marks, or I guess it would be like players reaching their full potential, would it be within the Pirates where they could actually get to, where the Tigers are hoping to be? Because, I mean, we're still early on in the season. Last year, at the beginning of the year, the Tigers were one of the worst teams I've ever seen play,
Yeah.
and then hit a giant hot streak, and now they're still on that hot streak. But I mean, how far are we away, man? I mean, just have an honest conversation about it.
Yeah. So with the Tigers last year, I feel like they took the move to shed some of the dead weight, and they came on strong late. Um, and when it comes to constructing a winning team, I think that the formula is what we saw, not with like you said the Mets trying to spend their way to it, but more like the 16 Cubs, where you develop your foundation of homegrown talent and then you use your resources to supplement it. And you have to have that base, and that's kind of what we're seeing with Detroit now is that they have their foundation. They've got their young guys. Torkelson's coming around, and you ran off. Scooble's a huge part of it. Mize pitching, better than in the past. Things like that. So then you can go and get your Javi Baez and your Flaherty's, and you supplement with that part. Um, but really, yeah, that includes the guys that are that foundation playing up to or even exceeding their expectations, and that's what we haven't seen in Pittsburgh. This season, like we mentioned with the Cubs, a lot of one-run games that they lost, but they had runners on for many of those games. Not all, but they kind of died there late. But if you had a 2023 Jack Sawinski, if you had your like you said your normal Brian Reynolds, that comes up in those situations. So pluck Tommy Pham out of the season and replace it with the Jack Sawinski that hit 26 home runs or whatever.
Yeah.
So that changes things immensely. That's a big problem that we've had seeing the team not cash in on opportunities. The opportunities, if, for the most part, haven't been lacking. They've had runners on, but they waste them. If you had now, when you ask me how close are they to contention or how far away are they from contention, my answer would be one really big impact bat that they can't afford, and they may not even have the trade capital or it, be able to go get and use that trade capital in a smart way to bring in a player like that. But two medium bats, you have someone who's having a season like McCutcheon's having, or like that Sawinski, who I wouldn't put in elite territory in 2023, but comes up, drives in runs, maybe a little more of what we're seeing from Nick Gonzalez coming up, putting bat to ball, driving in runs. Um, You don't have to have but they could really use a big home run hitter that can come up and hit those 2, 3 run homers. That really swings it. And the number of 1 run losses that they have, if you have the player or two that can cash in those opportunities with the pitching that you have, it ends up being a completely different season.
Yeah. And I guess like when I started this episode and I was talking about like listening to the old episodes was, in 2019 when this started, we were on the precipice of firing a manager, getting rid of a GM. And at that point in time, like it was known that we were probably going into a full rebuild. Now, obviously the manager is gone. The GM is on the hottest of hot seats and is talked about, throughout Pirate social media. I mean, hundreds of times a day that, he should no longer be here. Pieces of that, kind of make sense to me because, you know, you've had your time, but then people complain about the fact that he has not made any moves, but you don't want him to make any moves, which is a weird, I don't know, conundrum that you would have is just like, well, I'm going to complain about him not making any moves, but I don't want him to make any moves. So, I mean, it's either one or the other. So, I mean, if you're going to complain about the GM, just basically say he should be gone and then don't really explain much after that, just based upon what's happened in this history. So, if another GM comes in, obviously, I would assume he's going to hire another manager. Most of the media, at least throughout all of this, has been pushing for Donnie Kelly to stay. And this is nothing against Donnie Kelly, but I mean, it would take a lot for a new GM to come in and not hire his own manager, hire his own people, and obviously is going to do what Charrington did within the first year, at least to a piece of that, is to look throughout the system and see what's working, what's not working. So you're looking at that happening during 2026. You may get a guy that can flip things around a little bit quicker. And I don't know if that means you're competitive next year, unless, like I said, you kind of catch lightning in a bottle. So that's where, like, I don't know. I'm just kind of lost in my mind in this thought process in this conversation, where like people are saying, okay, we should trade Mitch Keller, and we should trade Mitch Keller for MLB ready players. Well, isn't that what the Pirates did with Garrett Cole? Maybe they didn't choose the right trade partner, but I mean, I would argue that Colin Moran wasn't a terrible player. I don't think he was a great player, but at times was a fairly good player for the Pirates. And you got Joe Musgrove, who, was pretty good for the Pirates as well. Obviously, shined more once he left Pittsburgh. I don't think to any credit or discredit of Pittsburgh. But so now you're like kind of looking to fill holes kind of perfectly to bring this team to fruition while losing your main innings eater, the only guy other than Skeens who I believe could provide that bulk of innings. Like, that's where I'm saying, like, when I was thinking about, like, and I'm trying to, like, maybe this is like I said, it's like a brainstorming, free flowing conversation here, is that, like, trying to figure out how far the Pirates are away. And people are saying, well, trade Keller for, MLB ready bats. Well, that's going to happen in the offseason because it's not going to happen, in season, because you're not going to trade him for guys that, could contribute to a contender, which is what Keller would be traded to. So then that happens during the offseason. But at that point in time, like, it has to be a perfect trade scenario. Or for the most part, like, you're not trading Keller for what I believe people have pictured in their mind, which would be this guy that we're talking about, this 40 home run hitter. Like,
Right.
could that happen? Yeah, I mean, we've seen it happen before. We were talking about Brian Giles before this, traded for Rincon, and he comes in and becomes this like absolute spark plug. But throughout Major League Baseball, most of the time, like a major league pitcher is traded for somebody who is going to either develop, or you get like one major league player and a bunch of decent prospects. So that's where like I feel like the Pirates right now are at a crossroads, because you have people saying, okay, we should do this, which would kind of go more along the lines of what we saw with Neil Huntington, which is trying to bridge the gap and just kind of stay competitive and maybe catch that lightning in a bottle. And, Ben Charrington, who took, a Starling Marte and traded him for Brennan Malone, Leo Piguero, that high upside type of thing. And that's where this, like I said, this conversation just kind of like circles in my head, almost like going down the drain, because it's like you're still like trying to, are we going to be competitive? Are we rebuilding? Are we retooling? And what honestly, at this point in time, are we building around? Are you looking for coverage of all four major sports leagues? NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL. Look no further than Sportsvival. At Sportsvival, they are dedicated to providing quality sports analysis, up to date news, and original content with a focus on draft and prospects, analyzing how teams are built and how franchises evolve through their strategic decisions. Without sports, how would we survive? Sportsvival, proud partners of Bucks in the Basement.
So yeah, you're seeing the differences between the two GMs. You know, the trades that Charrington has tried to make have been trading for, a higher ceiling opportunity, and they were riskier. Where it seems like Huntington was higher floor, maybe lower ceiling, and but getting those like more MLB ready prospects. But I think that we run the risk that if Charrington is let go, do we? I think his strength has been in the draft and identifying talent in the draft. Now we haven't seen a whole lot come up and really be able to prove one way or the other. Skeens was a slam dunk. Now I know that on draft night there was discussion about which of the three would go first, but with hindsight, being 2020, Skeens is generational and a slam dunk. Henry Davis was maybe rushed to get his bat in the lineup, and he's not a wasn't a consensus number one. He was a strategic number one, and we'll see what the fruits of that draft are later. But if you get rid of Charrington and then you get like Tremar comes up, and if he hits, Connor Griffin, if he when he eventually comes up, because that was a roll of the dice to take a high school bat in that first round in the situation that the Pirates found themselves in. That was what you say. You take the best available player. You don't worry about positional need. You take the best available player. So I think that we run the risk if he's let go, that those players in that kind of situation, they come up and they help that next generation. And it's like, well, that's a Charrington guy. That's whoever the new GM is. Well, he can't do it. That's a Charrington guy that's helping us win. So I think that yeah, that we run the risk of that. Now with Mitch Keller, you're right, and that's a great point that you made. That if you trade him in season, you're not going to get the return because you're trading him to a contender who needs to hold on to their major league pieces that contribute to them winning. Now, if you trade Mitch Keller in the season, you're maybe going to get more like some double A players that have a lot of promise but still have some risk. If you want a couple of those guys, maybe you get a guy who doesn't have a lot of time at AAA, but you shed the money. And we're talking about how far away, and I say that there's two bats away, two middle of the road bats. Can you now? Mitch is making 15 million, but can you get those bats for 20, 10 apiece? And moving Mitch, you get a couple of AA players that could turn into something, and then you free up that money. But it's terrible. It's what I said to I've said a couple times now. Is it's terrible that we have to take into account the financials of this, and not in the same kind of way that football podcasts have to worry about cap space. It's like, well, one team can spend 6 times what other teams spend, and that we see on the shopping list that would get us where we want to be, but we just can't afford it.
Yeah, and to me, like I go through even the built the rotation type of thing, and I'm like I said, I'm just trying to have this conversation, and maybe I'm a little bit combative tonight, and maybe that needs to happen just to have these types of discussion. Is you have Skeens, and you take away Keller, then you have Bailey Falter, and then you have like Mike Burrows slash Braxton Ashcraft slash Carmen Majinski. And you would hope that they may be able to fill up two of those spots, but right now they fill up one. So you have two of those spots to fill. And at least one of those with a outside acquisition, which the Pirates have done every year, with a Jose Quintana, with a Perez, with Tyler Anderson, whoever it may be, Andrew Heaney this year. So you have some of that money going towards that. And to me, that fifth rotation spot still kind of becomes a question mark because, as we've discussed before, and, you know, local media, national media is finally starting to discover that Bubba has been struggling for the past 2 months. People are saying, like, and I heard it on, I don't know if it was, I don't know where it was recently, where it's just like, oh, he finally he started pitching badly, like immediately, like about a week ago, because he was ready to come up, and I'm like, dude, he's been pitching bad for like 2 months, like what are we talking about here? And like I said before, I don't think he's going to be I don't believe that it means he's going to be a bad pitcher, but I mean, as Pirates fans, we have so much of this built up in our heads. It's like we see this guy coming up. We saw Skeens. We saw what Jones at the beginning of last year. That it was like going to be this automatic thing. And it's just like, no, you can have questions about this. Hunter Barco just, had a bad outing, last week. We've seen Thomas Harrington struggle at the major leagues and at the minor leagues. Had a really good outing during his, last thing. But like, when I say like, okay, we have this pitching staff built, like we have this pitching staff built this year in my mind. Do we have the pitching staff built beyond this year? I mean, there's a lot of question marks. So like, that's where it's just like, to me, like I keep going back to 2019 when I started this, man. And I just keep thinking about this is that, yeah, I think this is more of a rebuild than people are willing to admit. And I think that a lot of people, in my eyes, and you can disagree with this, Scott. I mean, we can have like this discussion, is that I feel like that we're a lot further away than people are willing to admit. I think we're trying to hold on to what was started in 2020, that this rebuild was going to work, and that, that we're really this close. Like, there's not a lot of pieces that are working right now. If Reynolds doesn't come back and hit, like, there's a piece down. Cruz, we've seen struggling. I believe in his bat, and I believe that he'll be a Major League Baseball player, but I don't know if he's the McCutcheon that we were hoping he would be and be that, like, MVP caliber candidate. Like,
I would be okay with him being the Pedro.
yeah.
Just be the Pedro. Just hit the home runs. With the way that this is constructed, Skeens can be like the Verlander and win Cy Youngs and MVPs.
Yeah.
Be that dominant. And I'm willing to trade a Mitch that he'll keep you in the game every 5 days, But if allotting those resources in a different way gives you a guy or two that can give you increase your odds to win the rest of the week, you're not going to have a perfect team. You're going to
No.
have something that's going to lack one way or another. So,
Yeah.
I will take the question mark in the fifth rotation spot if that means that you have some guys that have the capability of producing more runs when somebody leads off an inning with a double, you don't leave them sitting on second base so often. So, yeah, I'll take that trade off if that's a way that they can make it work.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, man. I'm just thinking to myself, like, I think I'm maybe going glass half empty tonight. And I think that has to happen from time to time because I feel like that for the past, at least up until the end of last season, there was a very glass half full like look at this team as to what could happen, what could be. And like I said, like if you look at it, I mean, if we go to 2026 and let's say Keller's not traded, because that's not a guaranteed trade.
Right.
But you're looking at your rotation for the start of next year, and you would have, obviously Paul Skeens, you would have Mitch Keller, you would have Bailey Falter, and then you would have, let's go with Mike Burrows, because I feel like Mike Burrows has shown the most. He's been given the most. It could be Ashcraft, it could be one of the others, but I can't slot anybody else into that. Around the horn, you have Spencer Horowitz. No matter what he does this year, I believe that he's going to be given that shot for next year. Hopefully, it starts to turn around a little bit. You see a little bit more power. You see a little bit more of what you saw from him in Toronto. Nick Gonzalez, open spot at shortstop. Brian Hayes at third base. Left field is open. And then you have Ono Cruz, Brian Reynolds, and then a conglomeration of Joey Bart and, Henry Davis at catcher. And like I said, before is just like, there's like we saw players come up and we saw players back in those days because we're the guys that saw, 1992, and then we're the guys that saw the Pirates come back in 2013. And for me, like, it's like, okay, if Nick can be Neil Walker, I don't
Right.
see him being, more than that. If he is, that's kind of great. Brian, you gotta hope he comes back and he's playing that right field. And no disrespect to Travis Snyder, but Travis Snyder was a good baseball player, wasn't a great baseball player, but as far as the stats go, like he would be producing what Brian Rhodes would be producing, like, the last couple of years. So we're trying to like kind of move that into that. But it's to me, it's just still like if those guys can do that. We didn't see those guys do that. So we would have to either have that immediate turnaround like the Tigers had this year,
Mhm.
or we're still looking at like 2027 competing, maybe 2028. Um, and that we'll hold on,
Right.
but I know that there's like people out there listening that are just like, I'm not trying to not sugarcoat it, but I'm also not trying to be like completely down on the team. And like I said to you before this, I'm just like, I mean, I believe Paul Skeens could be an MVP and he could be a Cy Young candidate, but the dude still only pitches 32 times in a 162 game season. So without, Bailey Falter pitching as well as he is, hopefully, Mitch Keller pitching as well as he is, like that doesn't have the impact that like for the Royals, a Bobby Witt Jr. has. Doesn't have the impact that, if you're going to go MVP type candidate like Aaron Judge, what he has for, the Yankees. It just can't. Like it'll equal the war, which I know you're not a fan of all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like it'll have that equal, like, you know, quantitative, like it'll be like a 10 war season. But does that actually, it's war versus like what other pitchers are doing. It's not war versus what position players are doing. So I'm not trying to be too negative. I'm just trying to have this conversation because I feel like that, you get to this point in a rebuild. And when I started this podcast, I felt like we were going into a rebuild. And I feel like we've come to kind of the precipice of like this rebuild. And it's like, okay, do we rebuild again? Do we retool? What do we do? And it's like looking at it as, you know, yeah, this guy's, I freaking pulled my phone up like while I'm still working to watch this guy pitch. Like it's amazing.
Mhm.
But dude,
Yeah.
32 games out of
Yeah.
162. Like,
But there's a couple different ways to build a team. Yeah, you can build a team around a superstar, like an Aaron Judge or a Shohei Ohtani. But also, you can build it the way the Braves did. You know, yeah, you have Acuna and you have Freeman and Riley. You just have guys that aren't. 'Cause I think Acuna, has dealt with injuries and things like that. Or the Nationals, they came from nowhere, but on the back of some strong starting pitching, and they didn't have all the same, like they didn't have superstars. I mean, a
yeah,
young Soto, that strong pitching, Trey Turner, like that kind of thing. Like that's how you need to build it. But to your point, you do need to have those players, those position players that can maybe cumulatively put those kind of numbers together. And that speaks to that. We talk about how baseball, the season is a marathon, but the playoffs is a sprint, and you need to balance it. That's a problem that this team, the Pirates team, has had this year is that everybody gets hot and the hit parade starts, and you just score what 3, 4 runs, late in the game, or everybody's cold at the same time and they can't push a
yeah.
run across to save their life. Balance it out. Get guys that are hot sometimes while other guys are cold. That's how you maintain that marathon, and then you have the right guys that when the pressure's on for that sprint, they can perform then too as a group.
Yeah. And I think there is like a balance of it. Like I believe that like it was the same thing that was said, during the season last year when the Pirates were hot and Jared Jones was pitching well and Paul Skeens was pitching well and you had Mitch Keller. I mean, in a series, like I would I would bet on the Pirates having a shot in all of those games. I mean, obviously, playing a team like the Cubs this past weekend, a team that many people believe that are built for the World Series, built for the playoffs. Like we were at least competitive against them. So like in a short, stint, that could happen. Um, I mean, I guess the Pirates are just going to have to figure out a way to get beyond that and be able to compete for 162 to be able to get to that point. I I'm looking forward to it. I mean, obviously we all are. Um, like I said, I think I just maybe am a glass half empty guy at this point in time. I don't know why. Like it just kind of happened to me, throughout the maybe like over the weekend where it's like, okay, God, if we could just win three of those four, which we probably should have, this team looks a lot better. If we win three or four down in Miami at the beginning of the season, which we probably should have, the team would look a whole lot better. And it's just those like not to steal the stuff, but like winning within those margins, you kind of get to that point. And I think it's going to take, I mean, at least like a good acquisition. And it's an acquisition that works out because, I mean, we've talked about many times like, somebody makes an acquisition that could be seen as a good acquisition and that player falters. And then it doesn't help out your team. So it's like still, is Gleyber Torres going to be the Gleyber Torres he was 3 years ago as opposed to the Gleyber Torres he was last year? Well, he turned out to be the Glaber Torres he was 4 years ago. So that works out well. So check that in that box. Do you know what I mean? So like that's like the stuff that kind of, looking at these teams, and I know I'm, referencing a lot of like what happened with the Tigers during this last series, but I mean, it reminds me a lot of what happened with the Pirates, in the early 2010s. Is that they have they have some pretty good pitching, some good young players, but it's just like everybody, like you're talking about, getting hot, like kind of at the same time.
And the difference there was that they would go and spend money. They would sign a Russell Martin. They would go in, of the acquire. It seems like when you consume what we've consumed about the Pirates, is that Bob Nutting has fully taken free agency off. He said that it's a losing proposition. That free, and maybe it is. Maybe the free agent market is a lot. It seems to be quite a bit different than it was back then. But really, of the players that were the cornerstones of that winning stretch that we had, in AJ Burnett was a trade, but so many of these other guys were free agents that were brought in or homegrown.
Yeah,
And it just seems completely off the table, and that, like I said, that has to do with how expensive these free agents are currently, and the opt-outs, which we haven't talked about in quite a while, but we've had
yeah,
several discussions about that. It just isn't beneficial for a team like the Pirates to sign a guy that, if he has a good year, he can opt out and go somewhere else, or if he has a bad year, you're stuck with his contract. And so it's really, that power has shifted. I really do feel like the only option for the Pirates is a complete overhaul of the CBA that could initially, if it's made a level playing field, they can hold on to Skeens and just buy even a few more years with him and get some of these young drafted talents to come up. If you have Skeens and Connor Griffin, if he performs the way that we hope that he does, and you have those guys for a couple of years on the same team, then I think you're a lot closer to where you want to be.
if not, we have to catch lightning in a bottle.
Great catch.
Now I see the change.